The person who discovers Atlantis is going to be someone who is dumb enough to think that it's real, but smart enough to do the research. She was basically a princess, and eventually it ruined her life, and it ended her life. Study what we want to study, even if other people might think that we're weird. Okay. How do you start something like this? I don't know. Well, whatever. Okay, welcome to this dark basement of archaeology. All right, before I say anything else, my name is Ian Scott. I'm a student of archaeology, and things like pseudo-archaeology, Atlantis, these conspiracy theories, have always been a great interest to me. But I am actually studying archaeology, and so I thought it'd be really fun to research certain subjects, but then to actually give them some real historical merit, do some actual research, and see if we can glean any truth from these things that we deem as mythological, in this case, Atlantis. I always knew that I was going to make a YouTube channel about Atlantis, honestly. But it was just about when. I had planned to get a degree in archaeology, maybe go for a PhD before doing this, to just bide my time, do some research, perfect my theories and whatnot. But then eventually I had a moment where I decided that I just needed to just to launch, So now here I am, and hopefully I do actually due diligence to Atlantis. And part of the reasons why I was a little bit hesitant to get right into it is because Atlantis specifically is actually it's not seen in a very kind light in most of academia. It's basically just considered a myth, fiction, and fair enough. It's often like kind of lopped into pseudo archaeology and conspiracy theories, stuff like ancient aliens and whatnot. So yeah, I get why that happens. And for most of my life, I also was in the same camp of thinking that Atlantis was just nothing more than a myth. And then kind of just by chance, I ran into some interesting things that led me down a rabbit hole. And now here I am. So even though we are trying to do some... Okay. This is a weird one to transition to. I guess that just happens sometimes. You get something that's a little bit like, how do I get transitioned to there? Ophelia is a character from Shakespeare's Hamlet. And she was basically a princess who had a lot of people in her life that were controlling her and manipulating her, and she didn't have a backbone, basically. And so she just let people control her, and eventually it ruined her life, and it ended her life. And we studied this in a class specifically to really learn that we can't let people live our life for us. To not just listen to authority figures, to be willing to push the boundaries, to challenge the narrative, and as students to study what we want to study, even if other people might think that we're weird for wanting to study that. And so we researched this, read about this this character and this kind of philosophy of thinking, and that really kind of inspired me to, I shouldn't be afraid to just go right in and just talk about Atlantis. And if people kind of like mock me and think I'm a little bit kooky for it, well, maybe they're right. But there's something that I've actually said for years, and it's that the person who discovers Atlantis is going to be someone who is dumb enough to think that it's real, but smart enough to do the research. There is a precedent for large discoveries coming from something considered mythological. The greatest example that we have is with Troy. For a long time, scholars thought that Troy, the Battle of Troy with the Trojan horse, they thought that was just a myth made up by Homer. And we only discovered Troy in like the 1950s, I believe, or maybe a little bit earlier than that, from a German archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann, who read the stories, collected clues, used contextual and geographical evidence and data, and went out and actually found the ruins of Troy. And now we know that Troy actually was a real place, and there was a battle of Troy but the actual details, I mean, we don't know. We don't know if Achilles was actually there or if the Trojan horse actually happened, but we know that something happened. And so even if it's only 50% true, that still means that there's truth. And I think that that is important and applicable to how we view some things like Atlantis. That even if the Atlantis myth is only 50% true, that still means that there's something real out there. Without further preface, let's actually just get into the main meat of Atlantis. Our story starts with a man named Draco of Athens. He's known as being one of the first legislators of Athens around the year, I think it's like 621 BC. And what he's specifically accredited to is writing down a written law code, right? And these laws, as a lot of early law codes were, was very harsh. There was a lot of death penalties in this law code, which is actually where we get the term draconian from. In this new government, Athens was ruled by people called archons. And one of these archons early on became particularly famous. His name was Solon, and he is actually going to be one of our main characters for Atlantis. He's considered one of the 7 great sages of Greece. While he did not set up democracy himself, he definitely paved the way for it. Because, well, in despite of all these draconian laws, he rewrote this constitution which freed all the people from their debts and set up a lower and higher court system for appeals, and just did a lot of law reforms that really liberated a lot of people in a lot of ways. And he seemed very highly in this, except by the other politicians and people in power who didn't like that now that people had more rights. And so he set up this law code and in an ultimate power move just said sayonara and left Greece for 10 years because he didn't want the possibility of one of the other politicians tricking him into reverting one of his laws that was helping the people. His first stop in his journey, his 10-year-long journey, was Egypt, specifically in the city of Sais. I think it's Sais. This visit is confirmed by Herodotus, who came a couple hundred years later, but he was a Greek historian. And the Herodotus, as well as Plato, asserts that Solon visited Greece during the reign of King Amasis II. Now, there is actually some debate about the timing of when Solon went to Egypt and what king actually was there, because the traditional dating of when Solon started his journey was year 590 BC, and I think the problem with that is King Amasis wasn't the king yet, and so either it's actually a different king or Solon went a little bit later. And so I think the newer theory is year like 570 BC for when Solon went to Egypt. So we'll just kind of go with that. But and some scholars don't even think Solon went to Egypt. But yeah, whatever. But who was King Amasis, this king of Egypt? Well, he is actually kind of interesting. He technically wasn't royalty. He was actually a general under the previous king, King Apries, I think it is. And there was a rebellion in Egypt, and King Amasis was sent to quell this rebellion. Well, he actually became sympathetic to the rebellion, joined them, and overthrew King Apries. And an important thing is that King Apries, he used a lot of Greek mercenaries. And so his General Amasis, would have become accustomed to the Greeks. And evidently so, because he was kind of a simp for the Greeks. And let me explain. When King Amasis became king, he sent gifts to Greek temples. He actually married a Greek woman. And it's thought that he built an extension to an Egyptian temple to just talk about Greek culture and history, which we'll talk about more in this story. So it makes sense why Solon would feel comfortable going to Egypt. Actually, it was pretty common. There's actually there was a trading colony in Egypt called Naucratis, I think it is. And Naucratis is Greek citizens could live in Egypt, in this city, and trade. So, and that was really close to Sais. According to the record of Atlantis, where we get this from, Solon was treated like a celebrity in Egypt, crowned with honors, is what they said. The Egyptian priests were excited to have this famous Greek lawmaker in their midst and at their temple. And they brought him to the temple, and they were going to just have like a back and forth chat about ancient history, exchange some mythologies and knowledge and whatnot. And Solon was trying to talk about some of the ancient Greek myths, and the Egyptians kind of just laughed in his face. And basically, I think they literally said, "Oh, you Egyptians are but children." And the reason why they're saying that is because to the Egyptians, Egyptian history is very long. It's one of the longest, if not maybe possibly the longest lasting civilization. And so they have these records that predate Athenian society. And so they were saying, you're talking about these ancient stories, which you consider to be ancient. For us, that's recent history, okay? We got stuff that triples that in age. But they were saying, but hey, no big worries though. Greece, Athens, has some really cool history. You have some of the greatest deeds in ancient history. And Solon was like, what do you mean by this? And the Egyptians were like, oh, well, if Athens defeated the Atlantean horde. And Solon had no clue what they were talking about. And the Egyptians were kind of dumbfounded that, oh, you don't know this substantial part of your history? Well, that makes sense. You Greeks are like children. There is no Greek graybeard. That's actually a quote. And so they said, okay, we're going to take you to the temple and show you the story of how your people defeated and repelled the Atlantean invaders. The source of the Atlantis myth. The Egyptians bring him to the temple, they show him this great story about how thousands of years ago, and when he had gathered them there, he said, thank you so much for watching this first video about Atlantis. This was taken from a longer video that we filmed that we are going to be releasing in segments throughout the month until we get to the end of the video. Then we'll probably be posting it all at the same time at the end in one longer form video. But thank you so much for watching, and if you want to, see the next video, subscribe, hit the notification, and mark it in your calendar. New episodes are going to be dropping every single Wednesday. Thank you so much. See you next time.